their arms if I go on too long, because once if I get really wound up,
Take your
I'll
time.
be here. We have other things to do. Yes, in eastern Kentucky in 1925, Mary Breckenridge founded the Frontier Nursing Service to bring trained nurse midwives to those remote mountains of eastern Kentucky and replace the granny midwives who were not formally trained to deliver babies. So the nurses, there were no roads, there was no electricity, there was no indoor plumbing, and they rode cabin to cabin on horseback to deliver babies. Here's the title poem, She Who Was Like a Mare, which is the translation of this goddess's name. Epona rides the woman's saddle. She holds a horn filled with wheat in her left hand, while her right strokes the mane. A foal follows. Sometimes Epona is enthroned, flanked by horses who dine on apples warm from the bowl of her lap. From Gaul, legions carried the mare goddess to Rome, where they boxed her in stables, draped her with roses. Only the Celts gave her sway over rivers, streams, begged blessings for the crossings of both the rider and the steed. I kind of wanted to frame the book with that poem. I had a wonderful poetry professor in the MFA program who said, "Now I want you all to go home," he said in one of our poetry workshops, "and get a good book of mythology, folk tales, and so forth, and find a mythological allusion that might work with what you're working on." The first nurse midwives that worked for the Frontier Nursing Service were all from the United Kingdom. America wasn't training nurse midwives at the time, so Mary Breckenridge ultimately founded the first school. She also founded a hospital in this little community in eastern Kentucky that she worked out of, in Hyden, Kentucky is the name of the little town. So she was a woman who solved problems all of her life. One of the things she had done the first couple of years was had a photographer come in and take some pictures. She really was smart about publicity and promoting the service. They lived on their donations, so they needed to have publicity out. So this is a poem written about one of the photographs. Photograph, date unknown. Oh, I want to mention a couple things. There's a reference to couriers. The couriers were young women from well-to-do families mostly who had been riding horses probably almost all their lives, and they volunteered to spend time in these mountainous communities and take care of the horses that the nurses rode and go meet visitors at the train station that was about 40 miles away, that sort of thing. Wendover is the name of the headquarters of Mary Breckenridge, that big house she built. It became where she lived, her home for the rest of her life, and also the headquarters for the service. What could we know about these women? 16 of them, all on horseback, panoramic in a wobbly arc, shallower than a horseshoe. The photographer, assumed male given the era, positions the camera left of center. This makes Mary, first in line, loom closest. He steps back to reveal a slim foreground of fallen leaves, a slice of sky and bare branches. Do the horses jostle each other as the riders crowd into place? Do the novices grin apologies for the difficulties of lining up just so? Riders sit erect. Mary has lectured on the fundamentals of posture, but only she appears at ease, loose arms, not clutching reins or saddle horn. From this far back, the others are as anonymous as soldiers on the field, alike in blue uniforms and brimless hats. There is no knowing which are the Scottish nurses, lured by tales of horses and dogs and life in the mountains. No telling which is the Irish girl who will die, appendix too late removed, her horse led riderless to a funeral down a trail. From here, the nurses' expressions are lost, but Mary looks pleased. Her plan is working. Even now, couriers are in Wendover steeping tea. to keep up the traditions of the British Isles, since these nurse midwives were so far from home, the couriers would serve the UK nurse midwives tea every afternoon, in addition to slopping out stalls and everything else they did. I'm sure they washed their hands. There was some mountain medicine going on, and there was a mountain doctor here and there. But medicine was changing, even in this remote area, and obstetrics was a fairly new specialty at the time. It was becoming, for people who lived in cities and the beginnings of suburbs across America, is becoming the desired place to have your baby was not at home, but at a hospital. So the medicalization of childbirth was really underway about this time. So here was Mary kind of doing things this old-fashioned way, door to door, bringing health care right to your home. At the same time, doctors were saying, no, I'm not coming out to see you, you must come see me. She decentralized medical care. It was a wonderful model. So this is a found poem from something I read, written by a doctor who worked in the mountains in this era. A mountain doctor muses, "The most tragic obstetrical cases are the inaccessibles, left to God and nature, the mother struggling, straining in a cabin back of the beyond. Of course, those left in the inexpert hands of a granny woman fare just slightly better. Grannies know only bruise for miseries, hog-greased hands, boiled rags for the cord. Only with reluctance is a doctor called, and he may feel the same in going. He could find hemorrhage, hydrocephalic, an impacted breech, anything, upon his arrival." I admit to reading Spoon River Anthology too many times. I read it too many times in high school instead of the geometry homework and chemistry. Oh, didn't do that, just kept reading that. So I really like the idea of multiple voices. This is another found poem. I got to spend 3 days in the archives at the University of Kentucky when I researched this book, and this is where Mary Breckenridge had left all her papers. And that was great. It was like a Christmas present. The librarians just keep bringing out these boxes, and it's like opening up wonderful Christmas presents. This was from a memo that she had typed, apparently, in her own hand, judging by the look of it. A memo from Mary Breckenridge. "This is to inform you that we have 37 horses and none to spare. New riders must learn to saddle, bridle, girth their horses, and experienced riders ask experienced riders how best to sit in the saddle without pounding the horse. Never put on a horse any saddle but his own. Cleanse all abrasions, both noon and night. A horse sent off duty, thanks to a careless rider, costs us $1 a day. Bad backs on our horses are as inexcusable as mix-ups in medications, as bed sores in the hospital. If you injure your horse, we will assign you the poorest ride until you learn otherwise." She was tough. I knew I never wanted to work for her. I read too many really grumpy memos from her. She designed the uniforms she wanted them to wear because she didn't want them to be, she worried they would be wandering into areas where people had stills, that sort of thing. So she wanted them to wear uniforms, and they were a quasi-military uniform. She was from the other side of Kentucky, the bluegrass side, and came from Confederate aristocracy. And the eastern side of Kentucky was largely Yankee supporters. And so she made their uniforms a Confederate gray, which I thought was interesting. She exerted her will in many ways. Lenore's a nurse I invented, a Scottish nurse midwife. Lenore grumbles about uniformity. "Like little colonels of the Confederacy, we are curveless in blue-gray jackets. Tailor-made, Mrs. B says. Breckenridge made more like, in her image, and woe to she whose tie slips cattywampus. So how does she get away with it? Ireland's Miss Priss, her red-curled flag unfurled. Oh, I don't care for hats, says she. The rest of us clamp down our caps, but she, too many miles today have made me sour. Mary Breckenridge explains mountain medicine. One thing leads to another. A cold becomes brown skeeters, then pneumonia, perhaps death. We see whooping cough and measles, tonsillitis, influenza, diphtheria, typhoid, tuberculosis, dysentery, hookworm, 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 and calamities, deep gashes from cutting timber, snake bites, gunshot wounds, men crushed in their own small minds, a girl twirling in her dress by the hearth, burned, twin baby boys orphaned, malnourished, like meat drying on bone. But joys, too, the twins Hardy, adopted, girls in overalls like their brothers, netting over cribs in summer, children lining up waiting for vaccinations, infected tonsils removed, bodies mended. Some battles end up wins for our side. I was almost through with this book before I realized there were so many battle references in here, and she had gone to, Mary Breckenridge had gone to France right after World War I and was on a Red Cross committee that looked at devastated France and tried to figure out how to bring back healthcare delivery. And that had a huge impact on her. And I think she had so many military men in her family, and seeing the aftermath of war, I just think she thought of medicine as a battle. I don't know about you, but when I was in junior high and high school, my history classes pretty much consisted of a litany of wars. I don't even think we were taught how many people were killed in the wars, just what year it started and when it finally ended, sort of thing. So I felt cheated about that. And in fact, I wanted to teach. At one point, I decided I wanted to teach history in high school, and I thought if I get certified to teach English and history, you know, couldn't fail to get a job. You know, it'd be so great, such a great combination. And then somebody, an advisor, in fact, it was at Youngstown State back when I was first an undergraduate, who said, "You can't do that. You can't teach history." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, what would the coach teach?" So that was the end of my history teaching career. I was swayed from that a little too easily. I just wanted to make the point to all of you writers that there's so much out there in history, and it's just waiting to be uncovered. Local history especially. It needs to be celebrated. Go to any museum, particularly a small museum, a local history museum. You will fill notebooks with ideas. You will never have a blank page ever again. This idea for this poem came from an oral history I heard from it was a tape recording of a woman talking about when she worked for the Frontier Nursing Service in its later years as a secretary. Hyden was the nearby town. Hyden man peruses Sunday paper. I don't know if you know what the rotogravure section was in a newspaper. There was odd pages that were given over to photojournalism, and it was only in Sunday papers generally. The Vindicator had a really nice rotogravure section at one time. And they were always brown, kind of sepia tones. Hyden man peruses Sunday paper. Reading the rotogravure, pages the color of tea and Mima's oldest linens, I see a photograph of our bank in the Eversole store. The picture snapped just as 4 pigs sashay down the street. I'm not saying there's never been livestock in town, but city papers are mighty good at noting any rickety cabin or toothless granny around here. They want people to pity poor, ignorant mountain folk. No wonder city people believe Kentucky is full to the brim with lifeless results of blood feuds. Winsome mountain girls, shiners passing the jug. Pity the poor mountain folk? Hear this. We are not ignorant. We do not need pity. And couldn't you have waited for the pigs to pass? A lot of sensitivity to the stereotyping that's been done. One of the delicate matters of this book that kept me up some nights was trying to tell some stories in the voices of local people, because of sensitivity to stereotypes. And I'm trying to find one. Where is it? Mary Breckenridge, writing her voice was difficult because she just intimidated me. I just felt she was going to yell at me. I wouldn't be her kind of person. No, bear with me a second here. Did a little reading across cultures about childbirth and found out that it's very common in a lot of, what we used to call old wives' tales about childbirth. Across many cultures, there's the notion that in order for a baby to be birthed in a safe manner, things must loosen up, which makes sense. So the idea of anything tied or knotted or crossed, people in some cultures became superstitious about. So I kind of applied that to this anonymous local woman. It's called knots. Didn't I see Callie Young on her porch last week mending? Didn't I say she ought not tie threads herself? Now that baby is tangled, I hear, and the poor girl's suffering. Preacher binds us, woman to man, with law and promise. Come birth and know, it's time to loosen. Open the gate, pull wide drawers, raise windows, unlace every shoe. Whatever needs to run must run. You can't block what wants to flow. That nurse can't know, so you be my legs and go speak for our old ways. Before you catch sight of the cabin, unpin your hair. If an axe is in the stump, you best wrench it out. And don't let Kelly's mama clasp her hands. I did all this for you, Hazel, when you were fast in your mama's womb. Then come to find your daddy cross-legged in the next room the whole time. Once he went around, whacked the beams like God himself shaking the world right, while you slipped out straight into my arms. That nurse don't know. She'll cross Big Creek 3-4 times to get to Callie's place. And then you'll have lots of straightening to do. Not all the locals greeted the idea of what they called brought-on women in a welcoming way. They were skeptical. Any change. These were people who, a guy in a nice suit might show up at your door one day and say, and this will sound familiar to you, you don't need those minerals under your ground. Sell my company the mineral rights. I might write you a nice check and you'll never miss it. Well, then they lost so much to coal. And then there were people who came and said, you don't need all those trees in those woods. Sell me the rights to your timber. You won't miss it. So these were people who had been set upon by strangers coming and saying, I can make your life better. Here's a local woman who's skeptical. On saddlebag women, that's what they called the nurses. They carried 2 saddlebags when they traveled. One was for birthing, and the other was for regular medicine. And they each supposedly weighed 40 pounds, which just amazes me. This afternoon, I took 2 of my classes to the Melnick Medical Museum up on Wick, and they had little bitty saddlebag for male doctors to use. And I thought, wait a minute, how come the women got these heavy loads? I'm not sure. Some woman from other side of Kentucky means to save us from our grannies. Too much death here, she says, so she's bringing us trained nurses. Medicine says they'll ride right up to the cabin to catch babies. What I say is, ain't grannies doing that now? We don't need no brought-on women here. Grannies know us, know whose babies are like to step out feet first into this world. They got warm hands, good sense. Don't need saddlebags as supplies. Looks to me them nurses must not know much if they got to tote stuff. I've seen these nurses, hard-looking women, wear uniforms with breeches like soldiers. I ask, what kind of woman wears trousers? They might make it through winter, but won't get past spring. Get some mountain mud on those fine uniforms and they'll be gone. You'll see. Ain't ours to say if there's too much death. Next thing they'll have doctors bringing on babies. Men. Birth ain't no sickness, and some of us are born to die. That's just how it is. Okay, just a couple more. I promise I'll stop. Oh, here's the redheaded nurse. This is based on a real nurse who was Irish who did die. And I just dreamt about her. She entered my dream life. She was just everywhere I looked. So I decided to write in her voice after her death. Nancy describes the topography. To find McBurney's point, draw a line from your navel to iliac crest, the highest part of your pelvic bone. Then trace fingers 2/3 down that line. Press. If condition is acute, you will howl. To find your way from Wendover to Cutchin Clinic, head east. Cross Wolf Creek, past the cabin where I made my last call. Ascend to the meadow where I studied stars. From there you can see down to the clinic and barn. To get from the hospital to the motor road, line up behind men taking turns with my coffin. Step in behind mourners and Raven, stirrups crossing an empty saddle. We'll pick our way down the winding path from there. Tom's vow. My wife Rose says she will have herself a nurse if she has to walk up to Wendover herself, but I ain't sure. Mama says she had Granny Whitcomb for all her babies, and ain't we breathing still? Maybe she forgot my sister Jane lost a baby, but I remember. I was shorter than a calf back then and not much older. It was winter, but they sent me out to the barn because Jane was suffering with that baby, and Granny Whitcomb couldn't do a damn thing for her but put her blue-veined old hand against Jane's cheek and say, "It's all right, child." When it was over, Papa come get me. When he said the baby was lost, I ran out the cabin door looking for tracks in the snow. Searched and searched till I couldn't go no further, and he had to come find me. Mama likes to say I was way up the mountain by then, and wasn't that sweet of me to go looking for Jane's little baby? Rose's own mama died with a granny beside her, childbed fever. At the end, her mama was puny as a newborn herself, Rose says. Took her 2 weeks to die, and nobody could do nothing. If I had my way, I'd get every last granny in Leslie County. I'd line them up on one side of the porch, herbs and grease all ready, and then I'd get all them nurses, make them stand at alert on the other side, soldiers waiting for battle, because this is my Rose. She should have what she wants and then some. I think I'll stop there.